You tell yourself it is love. You call it forgiveness. But beneath the word forgive hides another word, endure. And I must ask you, do you endure him because your soul still grows beside him, or because your fear of aloneness has become stronger than your longing for truth? Every woman who has loved deeply faces this trial. There comes a night when affection becomes habit, when tenderness turns into duty, and the voice within whispers, "If I leave, who will I be?" But I tell you, what you call love may be only the echo of an older bond, the invisible thread of attachment woven in childhood, when affection was mixed with anxiety and care was learned through pain. Do not rush to condemn yourself. Attachment is not evil. It is the root from which love first grows. But if you never prune it, it strangles the very flower it once nourished. Real love does not bind, it breathes. It gives both beings room to become what they were meant to be. Before you forgive him again, ask yourself this: has he met your forgiveness with growth or only with relief? If he has looked into his own shadow, if he has faced his own demons beside you, if both of you now speak with greater honesty and less fear, then forgive and begin anew. That is love's labor, the alchemical work of two souls refining each other through truth. But if he returns unchanged, if his apologies are merely charms to soothe your anxiety, if you must keep silencing your intuition to maintain peace, then it is no longer forgiveness, it is self-betrayal. You are keeping alive what should be allowed to die. Yet do not mistake my words for cruelty. Relationships can transform if both souls are willing to descend together into the dark. If he can bear to see the woman behind your persona, and you can see the man behind his mask, something sacred begins. Love becomes the vessel of individuation, the mirror through which each discovers their deeper self. That is why I never advise leaving too quickly. Many have fled their mirrors only to meet them again in another face. So stay, but with eyes open. Speak not to soothe him, but to reveal what your soul requires. Let him see the truth of your longing, not the performance of your patience. If he cannot bear that truth, his love was never prepared for the whole of you. And if the day comes when every effort has failed, when your forgiveness only deepens your emptiness, then walk away not in anger, but in obedience to your own self. For the self is the greater partner, and it demands honesty above comfort. Remember, love was never meant to make you smaller. It was meant to make you real. If you stay, stay to grow. If you go, go to awaken, but never remain bound to what refuses to meet you in truth, because what you call love may be only the fear of being unloved, and once you see that, you are already free. When I speak of love, I do not begin with ecstasy or harmony, but with hunger. Beneath the tenderness of affection lies something more ancient, a cry for belonging that was formed long before consciousness opened its eyes. What we later call love often begins as attachment, that primal bond through which the infant first meets the world and believes it safe. In those early years, the soul learns through dependence. The child clings not only to warmth, but to survival itself. The first touch, the first gaze carries both comfort and fear. Love and anxiety are braided together so that to be held becomes indistinguishable from the fear of being dropped. That ambivalence is the cradle of every future affection. When we grow, we may change faces, yet we still search for that same fusion, security and passion, protection and danger intertwined. The psyche is faithful to its beginnings. It seeks not fulfillment, but recognition of what it already knows. Thus, the woman who forgives endlessly often repeats the first pattern of her heart. She endures pain, yet cannot let go, because the pain feels like home. The lover's absence reawakens the same trembling that once accompanied the absence of the parent. In her forgiveness, she unconsciously hopes to heal not the man before her, but the wound behind her. This longing is not merely personal, it is archetypal, older than any single life. Within the soul lies a universal memory of separation, the exile of the human ego from the wholeness of the self. Every attachment reflects this cosmic drama, the yearning of the fragment to return to the whole. We seek it in faces, in bodies, in voices that promise unity. But the unity we chase outside ourselves is only a mirror of the unity we have lost within. In this way, relationships become symbolic theaters. The man she loves is never just a man. He is the embodiment of a deeper myth, sometimes the lost father, sometimes the saving God, sometimes the shadow who holds her unspoken fear. The mind does not choose these roles, the unconscious assigns them. What she calls fate is the pattern of her psyche, seeking completion through repetition. Forgiveness, too, can serve the pattern. When she forgives without transformation, she preserves the old arrangement. The child within believes that by being patient enough, by being pure enough, she will finally be loved without fear. But no amount of endurance can buy awakening. Each cycle of wounding and reconciliation only strengthens the invisible chain, the chain forged not of malice but of blindness. It is a delicate blindness. She believes her endurance to be faith, her anxiety to be devotion. But endurance born of fear is not love, it is a refusal to see. True devotion demands vision, the courage to perceive what the heart would rather not know. The soul cannot grow where comfort is mistaken for connection. I have seen this figure often in dreams, a young girl standing at a window, looking toward the road. She waits for someone who promised to return. Her face is calm, her hands folded, yet in her eyes live centuries of longing. This is the inner child, the watcher of lost hopes who dwells in the psyche of every woman who waits too long. She does not need another apology. She needs to be seen by the conscious self who can say, "You waited long enough." If this inner figure remains hidden, she governs life from the shadows. Each new love becomes another repetition of the same vigil. The beloved is only the next traveler on that road, the next hope projected upon the horizon. The forgiveness offered to him is not for his sake, but for hers, for the part of her still pleading, "Do not leave me as they did." Yet this recognition is the beginning of freedom. Attachment is not evil. It is the seed from which love grows. But the seed must crack before it can become a tree. When attachment remains unconscious, it binds the soul to endless repetition. When it is brought into awareness, it becomes initiation. The woman who dares to look into the face of her attachment without disguise begins the first stage of individuation. She withdraws the projection and stands before her own hunger, not as a victim of it, but as its witness. Love purified by truth begins here, in the pain of seeing clearly. Only when she no longer mistakes endurance for love, fear for faith, can she begin to love without chains. She will still feel longing, but it will no longer command her. She will still forgive, but only where growth is possible. In that moment, the child at the window steps away, and the woman turns inward, toward the road that leads not to another, but to herself. There is a moment in every woman's life when she begins to sense that her love no longer nourishes her soul. The gestures continue, the gentle voice, the patience, the forgiveness, but beneath them something silent grows. It is the ache of falseness, the weariness of pretending that all is well, when the soul knows it is not. She feels it most at night, in the quiet after reconciliation, when the house is still, and her heart whispers a single question: what am I keeping alive? Most relationships are not destroyed by hatred, but by fear. Fear of solitude, fear of change, fear of the void that opens when illusion collapses. The human being clings to love not because it fulfills her, but because it distracts her from aloneness. The mind will call this forgiveness, loyalty, devotion, words that make endurance seem sacred. Yet, if she listens closely, she will hear another voice beneath them, a trembling that says, "I forgive because I am afraid to begin again." The world praises such endurance. It tells her that the good woman is she who keeps the peace, who softens anger, who loves unconditionally, but the psyche does not reward false harmony. The unconscious rebels against lies spoken in the name of virtue. Every time she silences her truth, a part of her retreats deeper into shadow, waiting for the moment when pretense becomes unbearable. In psychological terms, this disguise is the persona, the mask we wear to meet the expectations of others. It allows us to function in society, but it also conceals the living soul. For the woman who continually forgives, the persona takes the form of patience, of gentleness, of understanding. She appears calm, while within her burns unspoken rage. She appears compassionate, while inwardly she bleeds from the wounds she will not name. Over time, this mask becomes suffocating. The voice of the self, the central truth of her being, begins to press from within, seeking expression. It sends dreams filled with symbols of confinement, locked doors, heavy veils, rooms without windows. It sends sudden bursts of emotion that seem out of proportion to events. These are not signs of madness, but of awakening. The soul, long muted, begins to speak. Most do not understand this crisis. They imagine that they have simply fallen out of love, that boredom or fatigue has set in. But the truth is more profound. The mask has begun to crack, and through the fissures, the authentic soul demands to be seen. What once felt like devotion now feels like imprisonment, because the woman's heart has grown while her role has remained small. Many women mistake this inner revolt for selfishness. They have been taught that to love means to sacrifice, that to remain is noble and to leave is betrayal. Yet love that silences truth is not sacrifice, it is self-neglect. The soul is not honored by submission, it is honored by authenticity. There is no virtue in continuing a bond that demands blindness. To understand this fully, one must see how illusion operates in love. Every human being projects upon the beloved the image of what they most desire and most fear. Rarely do we see the person before us as they are. We see instead the mirror of our own longing. The woman who forgives too easily often projects upon the man the image of the Redeemer, the one who will finally bring peace to her restless heart. She endures his failures because she cannot bear to lose the symbol of salvation. Yet projection, though it begins unconsciously, is not evil. It is the soul's first attempt to know itself. In falling in love, she catches a glimpse of her own depths reflected in another. But when she clings to that image, refusing to see the truth of the other's limitation, love ceases to evolve. It becomes attachment to fantasy. The task of maturity is to withdraw the projection, to look beyond the dream to the real person standing before her. Here the myth of Eros and Psyche speaks deeply. Psyche, whose name means soul, loved Eros, the god of desire, but she was forbidden to see his face. Each night he came to her in darkness, and she felt his presence but could not behold him. Her love was blind. At last, driven by longing for truth, she lit the lamp and looked. The light revealed both beauty and terror, for in that moment she saw not only her lover but her own unconscious desire. Eros fled, and Psyche was left alone to wander through trials that purified her love. So too must every soul that seeks real love pass through disillusionment. The lamp must be lit, and the beloved must be seen. False forgiveness is the refusal to light that lamp. It restores darkness so that the dream may continue. Real forgiveness begins only after sight, when one can love not the ideal but the human being, flawed and finite. Anything less is not forgiveness but forgetfulness. There is a subtle tyranny in the need to forgive too often. The woman begins to believe that her patience is proof of strength, yet beneath it hides dependency. Each new apology she accepts confirms her role as the redeemer. She begins to fear her own anger, for anger would mean awakening, and awakening would mean change. Thus she calls endurance love, because to name it truthfully would destroy her illusion. But the unconscious cannot be deceived forever. What is repressed in consciousness re-emerges in dreams, in bodily symptoms, in sudden fatigue, or inexplicable melancholy. The psyche insists on wholeness. When the surface life is false, the depths rebel. The body itself becomes the voice of what has been silenced, the heaviness in the chest, the tension in the stomach, the exhaustion that no rest cures. These are not ailments, they are messages from the soul. When she finally listens, she discovers that what she fears is not the man's absence, but her own solitude. She has mistaken dependency for devotion because she has not yet learned to stand alone. To be alone is to face the inner emptiness that every human being carries, the space where divine presence once was and must be found again. To remain with the wrong person is often easier than facing that abyss. Yet solitude is not emptiness, it is preparation. In solitude, the self begins to reveal its voice, quiet, but unmistakable. It speaks not in words, but in intuition, in the sudden clarity that arises when silence deepens. The woman who endures this silence without fleeing into distraction will one day find within herself the same strength she once sought in another. The fear of aloneness is, in truth, the fear of encountering one's own shadow. When she is alone, there is no other to absorb her projections. She must meet the neglected parts of herself, the anger, the pride, the hunger for control, the buried pain. Many would rather suffer familiar misery than face this unknown terrain. Yet it is precisely here that real freedom begins. To cling to another out of fear is to flee the self. The psyche punishes such flight by creating relationships that mirror the very emptiness one seeks to escape. The man who remains unchanged after countless reconciliations is not the cause of her suffering, he is its symbol. Through him, the unconscious reveals the truth. You forgive because you fear to be alone with your own soul. There is a moment when the spell begins to break. It comes quietly, without drama. The same words that once soothed her now sound hollow. The apologies that once melted her heart feel rehearsed. The tenderness that once felt sacred now feels small. She looks at him and sees not cruelty, but limitation. And she feels not anger, but a deep fatigue, the exhaustion of one who has circled the same path too many times. This moment is not the end of love, but the beginning of consciousness. She no longer seeks to punish or to save. She simply sees. And in seeing, she begins to separate love from illusion. The man remains what he always was, but her gaze changes. She no longer looks at him through the eyes of the child longing for safety. She looks through the eyes of the woman who has begun to awaken. Such awakening is painful, for it demands the death of false hope. Many call this disillusionment, yet I say it is illumination. The soul cannot be deceived by its own dreams forever. The collapse of fantasy is the opening of vision. Only after she loses the image can she see the reality, and reality, though it wounds, also heals. Forgiveness, in its truest sense, is not the erasure of offense, but the acceptance of reality. It means saying, "You are what you are, and I am what I am." It does not demand reconciliation, only clarity. From this clarity, one may choose either to remain or to depart, but whichever path is taken, it will be taken in truth. If she chooses to stay, it must be because growth is possible, because both souls are willing to descend into their shadows and speak honestly. If he is capable of such descent, love may yet transform them. But if he cannot face himself, then her remaining only deepens illusion. The soul demands movement. To stay without growth is to die inwardly. Thus, the moment of decision is not a moral one, but a psychological one. It is not about good or evil, right or wrong. It is about consciousness versus unconsciousness, truth versus fear. When the woman acts from fear, she repeats her past. When she acts from truth, she enters her future. I have often said that love rooted in fear cannot survive confrontation with truth. It must die or evolve. Its death is never gentle. It feels like the tearing of one's own flesh. Yet in that tearing lies the birth of individuality. The woman who can endure this death without bitterness will find that she has not lost love, she has discovered it within herself. The world tells her to forgive endlessly. The soul tells her to awaken once. That awakening is the most faithful act she can offer to herself, to the man, and to the mystery that brought them together. For it is not the purpose of love to keep two people comfortable, but to make them real. When she finally understands this, forgiveness becomes unnecessary. There is nothing left to forgive, because there is nothing left to deny. The heart, purified by truth, no longer seeks repetition. It seeks revelation. And through that revelation, she learns the greatest secret of all, that love which depends on blindness is not love, and that the courage to see clearly is the first form of real devotion. Every true relationship eventually crosses a threshold where affection ceases to protect the lovers from themselves. What once felt like warmth begins to burn. What once was harmony becomes tension. The unconscious has entered the union, and its purpose is no longer comfort but revelation. Most people turn away at this point, believing that love has ended. But love has not ended, it has only begun to reveal its other face. The unconscious does not unite two people merely to grant them happiness. It unites them to further the work of individuation. Each soul brings into the union not only its virtues, but also its wounds, its complexes, its forgotten selves. When two lives intertwine, so too do their shadows. The relationship becomes a mirror in which each partner encounters what they have long denied within themselves. It is a sacred and perilous encounter, for the shadow resists illumination. The woman who continually forgives may believe she acts from compassion, But her endless patience is often guilt in disguise. This guilt does not originate in the present. It is ancient, inherited, carried unconsciously from generations of women who equated virtue with endurance. They were taught that love meant suffering quietly, that peace was purchased through self-denial. The daughter inherits this law of silence, believing that to confront is to destroy love, and so she atones for the world's cruelty through her own tolerance. Yet the psyche does not reward false virtue. The more she represses her anger, the more it gathers in the depths, pressing upward with volcanic force. What she calls forgiveness is often the temporary relief that follows repression. But unexpressed truth becomes poison. The body begins to carry what the soul refuses to speak. She feels heavy, weary, lifeless, burdened by something that is not entirely her own. In truth, she bears not only her sorrow, but the unacknowledged shadow of the man she loves. The man who wounds her repeatedly, who cannot meet her in honesty, is not always consciously cruel. He is possessed by his own unseen feminine, the anima, whom he has never integrated. She moves within him as restlessness, as dissatisfaction, as the hunger for ideal love combined with terror of true intimacy. He desires the feminine but fears its power. Thus, he alternates between pursuit and withdrawal, seduction and avoidance. The woman before him becomes both goddess and threat. When she forgives him again and again, she unwittingly participates in his psychic drama. Her endurance allows him to remain unconscious, for she absorbs the suffering that his own soul should bear. She becomes the vessel of his denied feelings, the sorrow, the guilt, the fear of inadequacy he cannot face. In her body and dreams, these emotions begin to live. She grows older in spirit, while he remains boyish, uninitiated, untouched by consequence. This is the tragic alchemy of unconscious love. One partner ascends into lightness while the other descends into shadow. In the language of alchemy, their union becomes a vase, a vessel in which the raw materials of the psyche are heated and transformed. The fire is conflict, the substance is the couple's combined unconscious. If they can endure the heat without breaking, the lead of projection turns to gold. But if one partner refuses the process, if he flees from discomfort, the vessel cracks, and both are burned. True love is the willingness to remain in that vessel long enough for transformation to occur. To stay in such a process demands more courage than most possess, for it requires that each turn inward, withdrawing the projections that first bound them. She must see that her longing for redemption does not belong to him, but to her own soul's forgotten image of salvation. He must see that his ideal of the perfect woman is not her, but his anima calling him to wholeness. Without this withdrawal of projection, they remain prisoners of illusion, two actors reciting a script written by the unconscious. Withdrawal of projection is one of the most painful acts of consciousness. It feels like betrayal. It feels like loss. The luminous aura that once surrounded the beloved fades, revealing the human beneath. But what dies here is not love, it is fantasy. The psyche demands this death, for without it, no resurrection can occur. The lovers who can survive this disillusionment enter a deeper realm of relatedness, one in which the soul, not the persona, speaks. In myth, this process is beautifully mirrored in the descent of the goddess Inanna into the underworld. She passes through 7 gates, and at each gate, a piece of her adornment is taken from her, her crown, her jewels, her garments, until she stands naked before the queen of the dead. There, she is judged and hung upon a hook, lifeless. Only after her body has decayed does she return to the upper world, renewed, radiant with wisdom. Such is the journey of every soul that dares to confront its illusions in love. The woman who ceases to forgive out of fear and begins to see with truth undergoes this same stripping. She loses her image as the patient one, the good one, the savior. She feels exposed, vulnerable, uncertain of who she is without those adornments. Yet, in that nakedness, she meets her authentic self for the first time. The false peace dies, and in its place arises the peace that comes from self-knowledge. The man, too, if he chooses to awaken, must descend. He must meet the feminine within himself, not as the woman he desires, but as the soul he has neglected. In dreams, she often appears as a figure, calling from darkness, sometimes gentle, sometimes terrifying. She represents his capacity for feeling, for empathy, for inner life. If he continues to repress her, she will haunt him through failed relationships and restless discontent. But if he welcomes her, he becomes whole, capable of true partnership rather than possession. When both partners enter this descent consciously, the relationship becomes sacred. It ceases to be an escape from solitude and becomes a means of transformation. Conflict is no longer feared but understood as the furnace of growth. Each sees in the other not an enemy but a mirror. The wounds they inflict reveal what has not yet been healed within themselves. In this mirror, the soul recognizes its own unfinished work. Still, the danger is great. The descent demands balance between confrontation and compassion. Too much confrontation, and the vessel shatters in blame; too little, and stagnation returns. The woman who awakens must guard against contempt, for contempt closes the heart. The man who awakens must guard against guilt, for guilt paralyzes the soul. Their task is not to accuse but to understand, not to judge but to witness. Only through mutual witnessing can love survive the ordeal of truth. There are times when one descends and the other refuses. Then the bond begins to dissolve. The woman who grows conscious can no longer tolerate the blindness that once felt familiar. She sees that her endurance now serves neither him nor herself. She feels sorrow, not rage, for she knows that he is still imprisoned by the illusions she has outgrown. Leaving him is not revenge, it is obedience to the law of growth. The soul cannot remain where it is not met in truth. When separation occurs after such awakening, it is not failure but initiation. The pain of loss is the final fire that purifies the heart. Many women who have left such relationships believe they have failed in love, but they have succeeded in individuation. They have carried the vessel to completion within themselves. The union that began as projection ends as revelation. Through the beloved, they have met their own depths. The descent into the shadow is never gentle. It strips away illusions of goodness, purity, and righteousness. It exposes the ego's hidden motives, the pride that disguises itself as love, the desire to control disguised as care. It reveals that the capacity to wound and the capacity to love arise from the same source, the soul's longing for wholeness. Those who can endure this paradox without despair will find in it the beginning of compassion. To know one's own darkness is to forgive the darkness of another, not by excusing it, but by understanding it. Forgiveness, then, is not granted but discovered. It arises spontaneously when projection ends and reality is seen. One cannot truly forgive another until one has forgiven oneself for the blindness that created the illusion. This is why so many apologies ring hollow. They seek reconciliation without revelation. As I have said, love is an alchemical vessel. Its purpose is not comfort but transformation. Many fear this truth, for transformation is a form of death. The ego dies piece by piece as the soul expands, yet those who flee this death remain forever bound to repetition. They seek new partners, new hopes, new illusions, but the pattern follows them, for it was never about the other, it was about themselves. Therefore I say to anyone who finds herself in this crucible, do not curse the pain, for it is sacred. You are being remade. The darkness that surrounds you is not punishment, it is the womb of renewal. Endure it consciously, speak truthfully, let what is false fall away. In time the light returns, but it is not the light of naive joy, it is the quiet radiance of the soul that has seen both heaven and hell and found them within. The descent into the shadow is the only path to love that endures. All other paths lead back to illusion. For love that does not include the dark cannot be whole, and what is not whole cannot last. The woman who has made this descent will never again confuse endurance with devotion. She will recognize that to suffer consciously is holy, but to suffer unconsciously is slavery. She will forgive, but not to maintain peace. She will forgive because she has seen that every wound was the soul's attempt to awaken her to herself. So I say, do not fear the shadow that love reveals. It is your own depth calling to you. Descend into it with courage, and you will rise from it with wisdom. For only those who have journeyed through the underworld of the heart can know what love truly is, a union not of illusion, but of two souls made transparent through truth. When the illusions have burned away, when the words have fallen silent, When the heart has known both union and loss, what remains is something the ego cannot name. It is not the end of love, but the beginning of its transformation into wisdom. For love, in its highest meaning, is not the fusion of two incomplete beings, but the revelation of the self through the mirror of the other. The human soul does not long merely for affection. It longs for wholeness. Every relationship that begins in passion, in projection, in the dream of salvation, is secretly serving this deeper task. What we call love is the instrument through which the unconscious seeks consciousness. When the two who were once infatuated stand amidst the ashes of their illusions, they are standing at the doorway of individuation, the process by which the psyche strives to become whole. At first, this doorway appears desolate. The warmth of illusion is gone, the comfort of certainty has vanished. Yet beneath the surface, something vast begins to stir. The woman who once forgave to preserve love now begins to forgive as an act of seeing. She no longer confuses pity with compassion, nor endurance with faith. She has descended into her own depths and found there a power that is not derived from another's approval. She begins to sense the presence of something larger than her own heart, the self, the inner totality that guides the soul toward integration. Forgiveness, in this new light, becomes a form of knowledge. It no longer denies wrongdoing. It beholds it with clarity and peace. She does not forgive because she fears losing him, but because she has understood that he too is ruled by forces beyond his consciousness. She sees the archetypes moving through him, the wounded boy, the fearful son, the man uninitiated into his own depths. Her understanding does not excuse his blindness, but it frees her from resentment. In seeing his humanity, she reclaims her own divinity. Love purified by such seeing is no longer possession, it is revelation. It does not cling or demand, for it knows that nothing truly belonging to the soul can be lost. To love in this way is to love with open eyes, to hold without gripping, to give without calculation. It is not romantic love that has achieved this maturity, but spiritual love, the love that recognizes in the other a fellow traveler on the path toward the self. This transformation marks the birth of the mature feminine, the Sophia, wisdom born from suffering. She no longer lives as the patient mother or the self-sacrificing redeemer, but as the conscious bearer of truth. Her tenderness has become discerning. Her compassion has become fierce. She no longer pleads for love to stay, she calls love to awaken. Her presence itself becomes transformative, for she embodies the principle that has always sought expression through her, the wisdom that reconciles opposites, that turns pain into understanding, that teaches love how to endure without illusion. When such a woman meets a man who has likewise faced his depths, a sacred polarity is restored. He too has met his inner feminine, his anima, and no longer fears her power. He has learned that feeling is not weakness, and that vulnerability is not humiliation but initiation. He has ceased to seek in women the mother or the muse. He now seeks the partner of his soul. In him, the masculine becomes creative rather than dominating, protective rather than possessive, humble rather than proud. When these two meet, each conscious of their own darkness and therefore capable of light, their love is not a refuge from solitude, but a communion within it. They no longer flee from silence, for in silence they hear the same voice speaking through both hearts. They do not complete each other, they correspond. They do not promise never to hurt one another, they promise to remain conscious when they do. Such a union is not fragile, for it rests on truth. This is the conjunctio of alchemy, the sacred marriage of opposites. It is not a fantasy of perfect harmony, but a living tension between autonomy and unity, between masculine and feminine, between heaven and earth. The fire of conflict still burns, but it no longer destroys, it illuminates. Each encounter becomes a dialogue of souls, a mutual labor of becoming. They no longer forgive out of fear, for nothing essential can be broken. They forgive out of reverence for the mystery that moves through both. Yet such love is rare, for it requires the death of the ego's childish demands. The ego wants possession, reassurance, permanence. The soul wants truth, and truth is merciless to illusion. The one who has tasted such love knows that it cannot be found through control or charm. It must be allowed as one allows the seasons. It comes when both have ceased to chase and have begun to listen. Even when such love fails outwardly, when time or circumstance separates the bodies, the bond remains inwardly alive. The lessons learned through it cannot be undone. Every relationship that has been lived consciously becomes part of the soul's treasury. Nothing is wasted, not even pain. The woman who lives in truth does not leave love behind. She carries it as a light within her. The man who has awakened does not mourn what is lost. He blesses what has been revealed. To love as an act of individuation is to love without dependence. It is to understand that every person we meet is a mirror reflecting a fragment of ourselves. The one who wounded us most deeply may have been the one who most faithfully revealed our unconscious. The one who broke our heart may have been the one who freed our soul. When we see this, resentment dissolves, and gratitude arises not for the suffering itself, but for the awareness it brought. This awareness marks the crossing from personal love to transpersonal love, from attachment to participation in the eternal. The psyche that has endured loss without closing becomes a vessel for the divine. Love now flows through it as a force greater than the individual will. It loves because that is its nature, not because it seeks reward. Such love forgives naturally, not as a duty but as a recognition. All beings are struggling toward consciousness, each according to their capacity, but the path toward this love is steep. It requires not only courage but solitude. There comes a time when one must walk alone, without the reassurance of another's presence. It is in this solitude that the self completes its work, reshaping the fragments of experience into a new whole. During this phase, many believe they have lost love forever. In truth, they are being initiated into a love that includes everything, the sacred and the profane, the joy and the grief, the self and the other as one. The self, that hidden center of the psyche, uses love as its most potent instrument. Through love, it exposes the ego's limitations, forces confrontation with shadow, and demands surrender of control. The ego resists, believing that to surrender is to die. Yet only when the ego bows to the self does love reveal its ultimate nature, not as emotion, but as participation in the unity of life itself. To reach this understanding is to perceive that forgiveness and departure are not opposites. The greatest act of love may indeed be to walk away not in anger, but in fidelity to the truth revealed. There are unions that cannot be sustained once consciousness has entered them, for their foundation was illusion. To cling to them would be to betray the self. To release them with reverence is to honor what was learned. I have seen many who confuse departure with failure. They believe that to end a relationship is to destroy love. But love cannot be destroyed, only its form can change. The energy that once bound two people in passion transforms into insight, into compassion, into creative power. The soul does not lose, it transfigures. Every ending consciously lived becomes a beginning in another dimension. The symbol of this transformation is the phoenix, the bird that builds its own pyre, burns to ash, and rises renewed. Such is love's destiny. When illusion burns, the ashes become fertile soil for the new. The woman who once forgave from fear becomes the one who blesses from understanding. The man who once wounded from blindness becomes the one who protects truth. In the fire of experience, both are reborn. But let no one believe that this rebirth spares them from future pain. The heart that has awakened remains vulnerable. It must remain so, for vulnerability is the price of consciousness. The difference is that pain no longer leads to despair. It leads to depth. The soul now knows that suffering is not the enemy of love, but its teacher. Without suffering, compassion would remain shallow, and wisdom would never ripen. Those who have reached this stage see love everywhere, in the stranger's smile, in the child's laughter, in the silence of the night. They love not as a sentiment, but as a way of seeing. Every being becomes a reflection of the same inner fire. They no longer seek to possess, for all things already belong to them through understanding. Such love does not fade with age, it deepens, becoming the quiet radiance of one who has united heaven and earth within the heart. This, then, is the final realization. What you called love was never merely between two persons. It was the self calling you home. Each relationship was a chapter in that return, each forgiveness a step toward freedom. The soul orchestrates even heartbreak to awaken you to the greater union, the marriage of conscious and unconscious, of ego and self, of human and divine. When you understand this, you cease to ask whether to stay or to leave, whether to forgive or to forget. You ask only one question: is this true? And whatever is true becomes sacred. If truth demands that you remain, you stay with devotion. If truth demands that you go, you depart with reverence. In either case, you serve the same master, the self, the inner truth that guides all evolution. Love that breathes, transforms, and endures is born only when both partners, or at least one, have surrendered to this truth. It is not the possession of the few, but the destiny of all. For every soul, in its own time, must pass from attachment to awareness, from illusion to reality, from dependency to divine participation. So I say, before you forgive him again, ask yourself not whether he deserves it, but whether your forgiveness serves truth. If it serves fear, it will bind you. If it serves awakening, it will free you both. Love was never meant to make you smaller, it was meant to make you real. To love in truth is to love as the self loves, without demand, without denial, without end. And when you finally love in this way, you will know that nothing was ever lost. The heart broken 1,000 times was the heart being reshaped to hold eternity. Every sorrow was the alchemist's fire, every tear a drop of purification. You will see that the one you thought you were forgiving was never the true object of your love. It was your own soul, waiting patiently for you to remember her. Then forgiveness is complete, not because the other has changed, but because you have seen through the illusion of separateness. Love and attachment have merged into one awareness, the living knowledge that all things are one movement of the same eternal spirit. You will no longer say, I loved him or I lost him. You will simply say, through him I found myself. When the story of love has been told to its end, what remains is not another question, but a silence. This silence is not emptiness, it is presence. It is the stillness that follows revelation, when the soul, having descended through longing, illusion, suffering, and awakening, finally rests in the knowledge that it has always been whole. I have often said that what is not made conscious will be lived as fate. Most people imagine this statement a warning, but it is also a promise. For fate, once made conscious, becomes freedom. The same applies to love. What begins as compulsion, as blind repetition, as attachment born of fear, can become the path of liberation if one dares to see it clearly. Every relationship that touches the soul carries within it the seed of transformation. Some remain in the soil of repetition, others sprout for a season and wither, and a few, those tended with awareness, grow into great trees whose branches shelter both joy and sorrow alike. The purpose is not the duration of the bond, but the depth of consciousness it awakens. When two souls meet, the gods are present. They use our affections as instruments, our desires as fire. Through attraction, they lead us toward what we have not yet integrated. Through disappointment, they compel us to see what we have denied. Each embrace, each betrayal, each reconciliation is an initiation into the mystery of the self. If one understands this, one no longer seeks in love the security of permanence. One seeks its truth. Love is not safe, it was never meant to be. It is a flame that burns away all falseness, and those who cling to illusion suffer most. But those who surrender to the fire discover that what burns is not the soul, but the husk that kept the soul from shining. The woman who has endured this work knows something eternal. She no longer needs to prove her worth through patience, nor her purity through forgiveness. She forgives where her heart is free to do so, and she leaves where her heart must grow. She carries no bitterness, for bitterness belongs to those who still believe they were betrayed by another. She knows now that every betrayal was the self's way of breaking her open to truth. The man who has faced his depths knows this too. He no longer hides behind charm or youth, nor seeks adoration to silence his fear. He has met his shadow and learned humility. He has met his anima and learned tenderness. He can now love without consuming, protect without controlling, give without fearing loss. He has become transparent to the spirit that moves through him. When such beings meet, even if only once, the world changes. They do not promise eternity, for they live within it already. Their love does not depend on words, but on recognition. In each other's eyes, they see the divine reflected, the same eternal light appearing in two forms. They may walk together for a time or part at the crossroads. It matters not. The union has already been achieved in the depths, and for those who must walk alone, fear not solitude. Solitude is the temple of the soul. It is there that the voices of others fade and the voice of the self becomes audible. It is there that love ceases to be a dialogue between two hearts and becomes the song of the universe heard through one. To dwell in such silence is not loneliness, it is communion with life itself. At the end of all analysis, all dreams, all broken hearts, one truth remains. Love is the great transformer. It leads the ego to the edge of itself and asks, will you die into something greater? Most resist. A few consent. And those few, having surrendered their illusions, rise again not as lovers seeking completion, but as souls embodying it. Love, when it is real, asks for everything and gives everything in return. It leaves us stripped, humbled, renewed. It tears the veils from our eyes and teaches us to see. It destroys the smaller self, only to reveal the greater. That is why love and individuation are one path, not two. For the soul's journey toward wholeness is always a journey through the heart. So when the moment comes again, when forgiveness is asked, when love falters, when fear whispers that to be alone is death, remember this: love was never meant to cage you, it was meant to lead you home. And when you stand in that home, empty of illusion but full of awareness, you will no longer ask, do I love him or does he love me? You will ask only, am I true? And in that truth, you will find everything that love ever promised: freedom, peace, and the quiet joy of the soul that has finally become itself.